Hi guys, so Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer clashed in Parliament on Wednesday, so let's hear what they had to say.
That this morning, the council leaders in Greater Manchester that he's just quoted, including the Mayor and including the Conservative leader of Bolton Council, have said in a press statement that they support a circuit break above Tier 3 restrictions. Keep up, Prime Minister.
That we know where the disease is surging, and we know that it is regionally distributed rather than nationally distributed at the moment, and that gives us a chance now to do the right thing. He wants to close pubs, he wants to close bars, he wants to close businesses in areas across the country where the incidence is low, and that's what he wants to do, and he wants to do it now, and yet he voted to do nothing last night, nothing in the areas where the incidence is highest, Mr. Speaker.
So what is Keir Starmer doing? So Keir Starmer is, up until this stage, he was caught between a bit of a rock and a hard place. He couldn't vote. He couldn't convince, or he couldn't tell his MPs to vote for the government, because if he did that, then when a disaster would arrive, he would have egg on his face, just like Boris Johnson would have egg on his face. And later he couldn't criticize Boris Johnson because Boris Johnson would turn around and say, well, you voted for it too. So he would be giving Boris Johnson a blank check to do something, and he would have no control over that. So that's why Keir Starmer isn't voting for Boris Johnson's rule of six or his new lockdown measures, the regional ones. Because once again, if Keir Starmer votes for it, it turns out badly, which it always does. He would be blamed as well for it. Now, the opposite, if he votes against it, there are two problems. First of all, he doesn't have any power. Boris Johnson has an 80-seat majority. But if he votes against it, then he's seen badly in the eyes of the public as voting against the government. The government are trying to do the best, as Boris Johnson is saying, and he would be criticised. So he'd be criticised if he does vote for it. He'd be criticised if he doesn't vote for it. So he has the middle ground. He has the chance to abstain, and he has convinced his MPs to abstain. Now, him abstaining has no impact on whether these rules go through, because Boris Johnson is the government. Boris Johnson has his majority. So Boris Johnson likes to play it up as, oh, we need the opposition on our side. We need them to support this. No, you do not. You have an 80-seat majority. This is just political theatre.
He says one thing at 5 o'clock about calling for a national lockdown. When it came to a vote in this House of Commons, Mr. Speaker, to impose more stringent measures, he failed even to turn up.
Because they're two separate things as well. So what you're trying to impose, Boris Johnson, is different levels, different tiers. And SAGE has come out and said the highest tier is not sufficient in dealing with the pandemic completely. The base measure is not enough to deal with the pandemic. So Keir Starmer later came out and said, we would support a lockdown, this circuit breaker, at least lockdown for a number of weeks to deal with the pandemic, because what we're doing at the moment is not working. Boris Johnson's plan is not working. The number of new cases are quadrupling every week or every 2 weeks. So this is a disaster. This is not working. What Boris Johnson is doing is not working.
Starmer! Mr. Speaker, I know that for someone who's been an opportunist all his life, this...
Okay. So I think some people have been whispering in Keir Starmer's ear and saying, you need to take the gloves off. You need to insult the Prime Minister. And finally, he's doing that. There are two things you need to do when you're in Parliament. You need to play the political game, you play the theatre, and you also have to keep the public on side. So Keir Starmer was acting pretty much like a lawyer, a solicitor, in his previous role, building up a case against Boris Johnson. But that's not sufficient in keeping the public on your side. You need to act aggressive from time to time as well. And you have to throw in the odd insult. Boris Johnson doesn't have a problem doing that. So you have to throw something back at him as well.
This is difficult to understand. But having read and considered the sage advice, I have genuinely concluded that a circuit break is in the national interest. Genuinely concluded. Mr. Speaker, it's the failure of the Prime Minister's strategy that means tougher measures are now unavoidable. That's Sage's view. Sage has advised that a circuit breaker should act to reduce R below 1, should reset the incidence of disease to a lower level, and should set the epidemic back by approximately 28 days or more. All three are vital, and that's why Labour backs it. So can the Prime Minister tell us what is his alternative plan to get R below 1? R below 1.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the plan is the plan that the right honourable gentleman supported on Monday.
So Boris Johnson doesn't listen to the question. What is your plan? Well, Boris Johnson's plan is this three-tier system, which is failing, which is not working, and which Sage themselves have undermined. I uploaded a video about that recently. Chris Whitty said that this isn't enough. The problem is the scientists are telling Boris Johnson, you need to do a lockdown, and Boris Johnson is trying to avoid that.
And the whole point, Mr. Speaker, is to seize this moment now to avoid the misery of another national lockdown into which he wants to go headlong by delivering a regional solution. And, Mr. Speaker, opportunism is, I'm afraid, the name of the game for the party opposite, because they backed the rule of six, or he backed the rule of six, and then refused to vote for it. I think at 3 o'clock, Mr. Speaker, the Shadow Health spokesman said that a national lockdown would be disastrous. At 5 o'clock, he was calling for it, Mr. Speaker. Let's go back to the approach that he was supporting on Monday. Let's try to avoid the misery of another national lockdown, which he would want to impose, as I say, in a headlong way. And let's work.
Now we get into the Boris the unionist, Boris the man who wants to put his arms around the world. This is typical of Boris. Insult the person opposite, not answer their question, and finally ask for unity. What Boris is doing here is he knows a lockdown is coming. I know a lockdown is coming. The people in the House of Commons probably know a lockdown is coming as well. But what Boris is doing is he's trying to make he's trying to build up political capital before the lockdown is imposed. So he's trying to take a few jabs at the opposition before he imposes the lockdown, because a lockdown is coming. The system he has put in place, the three-tier system, is not going to work. And that's not my words, that's Sage. Sage have said that it's not going to work. So whatever Boris is trying to do, it's not going to work. He knows a lockdown is coming. But he's trying to get in a few jabs at the opposition before he eventually imposes a lockdown. Now, he should be imposing it immediately. The longer he leaves it, the worse it's going to be. It's going to be much more severe, and it's going to have to last much longer. We're back to the beginning of the year. Boris Johnson was asked, impose a lockdown. He refused. He said, we don't need to do it. And then he eventually did it. And at that stage, the scientists were saying, okay, we're doing it now, but it's late. Many people have died because Boris Johnson was dragging his feet. And the same with the easing of the lockdown. I said, you do not ease it at this stage. It's too early. Wait until the number of new cases is much lower. But he eased the lockdown anyway, because he was taking heat from his backbenchers.
Together. Let's work together, as he was prepared to do on Monday, to keep kids in school, who he would now yank out of school in a peremptory way, keep our economy going. And
But Boris is going to do these things. He's just using this time between now and the moment that he's going to yank the children out of school or destroy the economy to score a few political points. It's quite disgusting.
Keep jobs and livelihoods supported in this country, Mr. Speaker, and let's take the commonsensical regional approach. And will he kindly spell out to all his colleagues across the whole of the country that that is the best way forward, as indeed he did on Monday.
Once again, asking for unity. But Boris Johnson doesn't believe in this. He knows it's not going to work. SAGE have told him it's not going to work, but he continues with it anyway because he's afraid. He's not a leader. He's not a true leader. He's afraid of his backbenchers. He's afraid of MPs in particular constituencies. He's afraid of councillors because they don't want to go into a lockdown. They're asking him, do not go into a lockdown or we're going to rebel. We're going to bring down your government. And there is a real risk that the government would be brought down or Boris would receive significant pressure to step aside. All of these things he's doing are compromises, not because he's following the science, but because he's listening to his backbenchers. The backbenchers are in the driving seat now, it seems, not the scientists. Even though you'll hear in right-wing media how the scientists are deciding everything, how SAGE is deciding everything, which is just a pile of crap because the scientists are not supporting these measures completely. In front of the cameras, yes, of course, because they have to. They have to stand by the Prime Minister because they're advisors. They don't make the decisions. Boris Johnson makes the decisions. This is just a countdown. We're at a countdown stage now before another lockdown. I don't know how long it will take. It could be a few weeks. SAGE talked about how cases, back in September, they said this, how cases probably by the middle of October or towards the end of October would reach 50,000 new cases a day. And we're on that road now, getting pretty close to 50,000 new cases a day. At that stage, what is Boris Johnson going to do? Is he going to accept that his regional system is not working, that his three-tier system is not working? And then will he go into a lockdown? Maybe he'll call it something else, circuit breaker or whatever. Use some other language than lockdown. Because once again, you have to convince the public that it's not a lockdown, even though it is a lockdown. I think, unfortunately, the country is extremely polarized. A lot of people are not willing to go ahead with this, to go through with another lockdown. The support put in place by the Chancellor is not sufficient to deal with another lockdown. But Boris Johnson doesn't have really any choice. And begging for support from the opposition is not going to do it. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?